Creative colouring using paint and watercolour pencils. So remember to pre-shrink your page ahead of time if you would like fewer wrinkles at the end. For a detailed video on this, see pre-shrinking your page. Pre-shrinking your page is always a good idea if you're using wet medium. That means watercolour pencils, whether they're woodless or not, and acrylic paints, anywhere you're using paintbrush and water. To get started, I'm shading the outside of the sculpture, the white space. I've used a light, a dark blue, and some red. When I add the water later on, it will turn a slightly lilac and purple because when you add the water, the pencils blend together. I recommend going ahead and doing most of your colouring with your watercolour pencils first before you start to apply water. As you colour with your watercolour pencils, bear in mind that as you layer the colours, putting one colour on top of another, there will be some blending that happens when you apply the water. So for example, if I've got blue next to red or blue and red on top of each other and I apply the water, then I'm going to get a hue of purple in there. So if that's what you want, spot on! You can apply the water in different ways. Here around the shaded areas, I'm using a dense sponge with hardly any water on it because I want those pencil marks to show through, but I do want the colours to blend. Then I switch to a paintbrush. This gives me much more control and I can see the colours blend, and with a paintbrush I can push one colour into another for better blending. If you end up with too much water on your page, then use another dried out sponge just to mop up some of it. Remember, while the page is moist, you can continue to add colour and you'll see more vibrancy pop if you're using your watercolour pencils on a moist page. Be sure to give your page time to dry in between layers. If you need to hurry it up, use the hairdryer. I'm going to add a layer of acrylic paint here. Now when you're mixing your colours, remember to add the dark to the light rather than the light to the dark. You'll save a lot of paint that way. I didn't want to blend them perfectly, so you can actually see the streaks of white and blue as I paint. Notice how the acrylic paint actually covers up the design on the page. If you don't want that and you want to see the design, just dilute the paint a little more. I've mixed my yellow onto the palette with some of the blue because I didn't want a primary yellow. I wanted a green hue to it. Give the paint time to dry and then you'll be able to draw on the surface of the paint. I've chosen to continue with my watercolour pencils to draw on the surface of the dry paint. Now, you don't need to, you could use pretty much any media that's going to show up. So it could be your regular coloured pencils, your felt markers, China markers, even ink pens. It's entirely up to you. I recommend experimenting. I like to sculpt with my drawings, which means adding more and more layers and texture. As well, I had some paint left on my palette, so I'm using the white paint, undiluted and not blended, to give some depth, and I'm also dipping my watercolour pencils so they're almost paint when they go onto the page. The only limit to how many layers you can apply is the weight of the paper. The Beautiful Women Project colouring pages are 100-pound luxe, which means you can play quite a lot before the paper gives in. Here we have used acrylic paint, watercolour pencils, both wood and woodless. I hope you had fun. Share your creative colouring with me via social media. #BWPColouring. Don't miss a tutorial, so like and subscribe and you'll be sure to catch them all. Cheryl-Ann Webster.com